We've got to talk about The Voice. What else would we talk about? I mean, there's all sorts of things, cost of living, energy, the fact that the lights will be going out in this country if Chris Bowen gets his way. But no, let's talk about The Voice, because we have to talk about The Voice, because The Voice is now the key issue that is going to determine the future of this country at the referendum in October. The groups fighting for a no vote at this year's Voice referendum won't try to match the cavalcade of Indigenous superstars and all celebrities and pop stars who are all back in the Yes campaign, but instead the No campaign intends to focus on ordinary Australians, as they should. Beginning next week, the two groups leading the No case, one's called Recognise a Better Way and Fair Australia, will launch ad campaigns to persuade Australians to reject the Albanese government's proposed referendum when it comes to a vote later this year. Warren Mundine's article is fascinating as well. He's written about how so much of The Voice, he says, I'll quote him, astonishingly, about 90% of submissions, this was to the Uluru Statement of the Heart that led to The Voice, 90% of the submissions to the co-design group and 80% of surveys came from, wait for it, non-Indigenous Australians in these submissions, where support for A Voice was especially strong. This raises the question, asks Warren, are we seeking to improve Aboriginal lives or absolve white guilt with grand gestures? Rita, give us your thoughts.
Well, we see that every day, absolving white guilt with meaningless gestures. When you land on a Qantas plane, you hear a acknowledgement of country. Now, again, who does that serve? Does that make one Indigenous life better? Or is it really about the people at the upper echelons of Qantas and some of the passengers getting this warm sense of virtue signalling because they're participating in this, or at the start of every meeting, it seems now. So we are seeing this, but that's one thing. You can say that's genuine. Well, it's harmless. It might be annoying. It might be pointless. It might be incoherent, but constitutional change is not harmless. This is a significant measure that isn't just going to give these white saviour folk a warm feeling. It is actually going to change this country, open the door to all sorts of lawfare where the courts are going to determine the direction of this country, not elected representatives.
James?
Well, I'm going to disagree with one thing Rita said there, which is to say that these constant welcome to countries are harmless. I actually don't think they are, because especially when you see them constantly used in the schools and elsewhere, what you're talking about is just the slow, almost subconscious undermining of the legitimacy of modern post-settlement Australia. I think that's a terrible thing, and I actually do think that it is working at cross purposes to us being a successful, prosperous, harmonious society. So I will say that. But, moving on from that, with this ad campaign that the No vote is doing, I sincerely hope that what they do is focus, the Yes campaign has all been about razzle-dazzle and celebrities and all of that. What I am really hoping, because the conversations I have with just regular folk out there, talk to people who are yes, they're soft yes, and they just need to have it explained to them what it means in a practical constitutional sense. And suddenly they say, oh, no one's told me that. And what, the Liberal Party, if they want to win this thing, and if the No vote campaign wants to win this thing, they have to be willing to keep explaining that, hitting it hard and in direct terms. And, I think that there's a lot of people in the Liberal Party, even those who are on the No side, who are just a bit too sort of scared to go out and do the hard work of really punching that message because they don't want to be seen as, a wrecker or whatever.
Well, this is a massive problem, and I believe it's part of the reason why Peter Dutton and the Liberals took so long to finally come out with a no, is that they see this as they're going to be blamed for the referendum not succeeding, for the Yes campaign failing. They shouldn't be scared of that. They should be unapologetic about their no position.
Exactly.
Because this is about a change that is going to be detrimental to this country. That is not something you shy away from. They should be absolutely bold in their position. And you're so right. There are so many who are in that soft yes vote. When you speak to them, they're almost desperate to be in the no side, but they've been told now for about 10 months that if you care about Indigenous Australians, if you are a kind person, if you're polite, then you'll vote yes. So they've had this messaging, unrelenting messaging for 10 months, and they just need a few facts and just a little bit of information, because that's what's been sorely lacking from the yes side. Information.
Well, we'll be talking to Jacinta Price later in the show, great friend of this show and an amazing politician, amazingly brave woman. But I just wanted to say, Rita and James, I was trying to think of a good analogy. Just imagine if you had a kid with red hair and freckles and you were suddenly told that the rest of the nation was going to vote on putting something into the Constitution that a group of 24 people would, for the rest of all time, make all the decisions on behalf of kids with red hair and freckles. They would be told that this voice for redheads and freckled kids, that voice would be in charge of everything throughout the rest of their lives. People would throw up their hands in horror. Yet this is what we are condemning Indigenous kids to. And Warren Mundine makes the very valid point that wherever he travels through outback Australia, many Aborigines don't want this. They don't want some quango of 24 people in Canberra making decisions on their behalf. Indigenous Australians are not a homogenous group. They have different opinions. They have different values. What if some Indigenous kid growing up thinks, wow, wouldn't it be terrific if I could go over there and set up a business over there and do X and Y and Z? But someone says, no, you can't, because that property is owned by one of the people on The Voice. Once The Voice owns everything, once they're in charge.
Jacinta Price so beautifully explained, it also, you're not just enshrining race politics into the Constitution, you're enshrining this notion that Indigenous people are forever disadvantaged. Because
precisely.
There's no end date to this.
No,
so
it's
are
forever.
we just now assuming that for all of Australian history to come, the Indigenous Australians are going to be downtrodden, that they need this additional
Well, they will be,
chamber?
because there will be 24 people sitting in luxury in Canberra in marble palaces having the great lifestyle forever, by the way. They won't be out. They'll be in there forever. And they'll be ruling the roost. And if you happen to be an Indigenous person who disagrees with the decisions they're making, bad luck, because that is your voice. You don't get a Democratic voice. You get their voice. You get 24 people on massive salaries sitting in Canberra making decisions for you for the rest of your life. That is what we are condemning Indigenous Australians to. As white Australia, immigrant Australia, non-Indigenous Australia has to stand up and recognise we are condemning these people to socialism and communism on steroids, our fellow Australians. We are condemning them to a life of misery under a bureaucratic quango wherever that has taken place, anywhere in the world, Eastern Europe, Asia. These things end up in tyranny. That is what we are condemning young Indigenous Australians to. Tyranny to some quango of elders sitting in Canberra in marble palaces. It's a disgrace. Vote no, because that is the right and moral thing to do for Indigenous Australians, James.
Well, it's not just for Indigenous Australians, Rowan. I mean, I think the other point that really needs to be made, and I think to explain to soft yes voters, is to say that, you know, even the biggest supporters of The Voice, Greg Craven, Megan Davis, admit that this is going to be, as constituted, a voice that will have a say on and will have to be consulted on things not just about Indigenous affairs and Indigenous lifestyles and, you know, how people in Indigenous communities live, but actually on every major piece of policy all across the entire gamut. Greg Craven has said it can talk to anything from parking fines to submarines. All right, he said that on the radio a couple of weeks ago, and yet he still says he's going to vote for it. Well, I think Australians are going to look at that and say, you know, I don't think so, because the real prospect is that you wind up with co-governance. You wind up with racial co-governance, and everywhere that has existed, it is a disaster.
That is the point. That's exactly
the point.
Reduce the power of Parliament, increase the power of the quangos.
Because every policy area impacts Indigenous Australians. So, of course, whether it's submarines, whether it's parking fines, if you want to use the examples put forward there, of course it's going to impact Indigenous Australians. We've got to talk about here immigrants as well. This is something
100%.
Because the Labor
100%.
Party has been very clever. They've been going to all the religious leaders in the Muslim community, for example, and getting support from them. They're doing that also, I think, with the Jewish community. And the Liberal Party, again, been far too slow to speak to immigrants. We've got a country of immigrants who feel like this is their home, who feel like their children are entitled to call this land theirs as anybody else. They shouldn't be welcomed to their own country over and over again. And that is a sentiment that's there, it's underlying, it's strong, and the Liberals thus far have failed to tap into it.
And not only that, for migrants, it's not only that, if you're a citizen, that you were told your vote counts as much as anybody else, but also it's this idea that you suddenly, by becoming an Australian, suddenly bear collective guilt for something that you have nothing to do with. But one final point I'd just like to make, too, is that Anthony Albanese thinks it's going to be great for him, if this gets up and everything. But I think there's also a longer-term, more cynical strategy here, too, which is to create a body that will create endless drama for any future Liberal coalition government.
It cements Labor power. It cements Labor power in for all time.
To give the left this talking shop that can keep blowing up and interfering with parliamentary processes by demanding consultation and so on, going to the High Court. It'll be a nightmare for a future centre-right government.
Well, there won't be one, because Wake Up Australia, we've now got wall-to-wall Labor governments across mainland Australia, and we want to have a voice as well, which will support the Labor government constitutionally in every single issue. Are we completely, utterly bonkers? You would have to be to vote yes to this voice. Let me just quickly say one other thing, Rita. You were absolutely right, and James, to call out the welcome to country nonsense that goes on in every aeroplane list. How about this, Qantas? Can you just shut up in future and instead spend the time and the efforts and the resources giving money directly to Indigenous communities, such as Alice Springs, where there are so many problems? I don't want to sit in an aeroplane hearing you virtue signal. I would rather know, just go, hang on, we're going to do a welcome to country, but we're not. We're giving the money. We're going to give some money instead to Alice Springs to help them there.
What about getting our bags off the plane?
So that's what you should be doing, corporate Australia. Do something useful instead of virtue signalling in front of us every 5 minutes. We don't need it. We don't want it. And as Rita says, we don't want to be welcome to our own country. It's my country. It's your country. It's our country. Stop welcoming me to it. I'm here already. Thank you very much.